Kairos 7 existed primarily as geological footnote, a mining colony world where various civilizations extracted minerals from substrata that most species found challenging to survey. Human engineer David Torres had spent 6 weeks conducting geological assessments for what he understood to be a standard colonial development contract. His project supervisor was Urethara, an alien whose species, the Kyrathi, resembled humans in basic bilateral configuration, but whose cultural frameworks David was only beginning to understand through workplace interaction. He'd been treating her with the casual professionalism that characterized most human workplace relationships, offering her coffee, which she politely declined, debating equipment specifications when he thought her choices were overly conservative, and occasionally teasing her about safety protocols that seemed excessive for routine survey work. "You're being overly cautious about protocols designed for less experienced teams," David said during a routine briefing, reviewing her latest requirements for field operations. "These radiation levels are well within safe parameters for the shielding we're using. The additional precautions will slow survey completion by 3 weeks." Urethara's response made the entire survey camp go absolutely silent. "Watch yourself, Earthling," she said, and her voice carried authority that David had somehow missed in 6 weeks of casual interaction. "I am no ordinary female. I am the sovereign of the Kyrathi ascendancy, and I personally selected you from thousands of applicants for reasons that go far beyond your geological expertise." The silence that followed was the sound of David's comfortable assumptions shattering. The camp's other workers, all Kyrathi who apparently knew exactly who Urethara was, stared at him with expressions suggesting they'd been watching him commit suicide by casual disrespect for 6 weeks, and were shocked he was still alive. "You're the sovereign," David managed, processing implications that were rewriting every interaction they'd had. "I've been treating the ruler of 14 star systems like a middle management coordinator who's overly worried about safety compliance." "Yes," Urethara confirmed. "And that casual treatment is precisely why I'm confirming your selection rather than executing you for the disrespect you've been demonstrating since arrival." Urethara explained what David had been operating in complete ignorance of. The Kyrathi ascendancy faced resource crisis that threatened all 14 systems. The rare elements they needed to maintain their civilization's infrastructure were depleting faster than surveys could locate new deposits. They'd hired human geological expertise because Earth's mining technology was more advanced in specific applications. "Your published research on mineral detection in high-radiation environments made you ideal candidate for surveys on Kairos 7, Urethara said. "But I didn't just hire you. I personally selected you from thousands of human applicants, reviewed your work extensively, and then did something unprecedented in Kyrathi history. I came to this colony world myself, operating incognito as project supervisor, to assess whether your skills matched your reputation." "You abandoned your throne to personally vet a mining engineer?" David asked, still processing. "To vet the specialist whose expertise might save billions of lives across my civilization," Urethara corrected. "The stakes justified personal assessment. And your casual treatment of me, arguing about equipment specs on merit, debating my safety protocols, treating me like competent colleague rather than untouchable authority, proved you could provide the honest technical assessment my dying worlds desperately need. So I've been accidentally demonstrating employability by treating you with basic workplace professionalism," David said. "You've been demonstrating something Kyrathi culture rarely produces around sovereigns: willingness to disagree based on technical merit rather than agreeing reflexively with power," Urethara said. "I've spent 20 years making decisions surrounded by advisors who only tell me what they think I want to hear. Your willingness to say, 'Your safety protocols are excessive and here's why,' proved you could provide honest assessment rather than comfortable agreement. That's actually reasonable hiring criteria, David admitted. But you could have just told me who you were instead of letting me treat you like mid-level management for 6 weeks. If I'd revealed my identity immediately, you would have modified your behavior to accommodate my rank, Urathara said. I needed to see how you functioned when you thought I was merely competent colleague rather than absolute authority. Your casual professionalism under those conditions confirmed my selection. Selection for what exactly? David asked, and something in his voice suggested he was beginning to suspect this wasn't a standard employment arrangement. Selection as my permanent royal advisor, Urathara said. Bound to the crown until death or my explicit release. Unable to refuse assignments or terminate service except through formal release, I have no intention of granting. David's expression shifted from confusion to horror as implications became clear. I signed a 2-year contract, David said carefully. Standard colonial development work with defined term and exit clauses. You responded to my personal recruitment, Urathara corrected, which under Kirathi law invokes ancient precedent making specialists personally chosen by the sovereign permanent royal advisors rather than temporary contractors. The contract your company presented was legal formality. The binding occurred when you accepted my selection. That's not how human employment works, David said, trying to keep panic from his voice. We have concepts like autonomy, consent-based employment, right to terminate contracts. I understand those are human frameworks, Urathara interrupted. But you accepted position under Kirathi legal jurisdiction, and in our law, being personally chosen by your sovereign is highest honor imaginable. Your expertise will save billions of lives. Your children will be honored for generations. Why would you want to refuse this? Because I value being able to choose my commitments, rather than being bound to them, regardless of my preferences. David's volume control was slipping. You're telling me I can't terminate service, can't refuse assignments, am bound until you decide to release me or I die. That's not employment, that's indentured servitude. That's permanent service to the crown, Urathara said, genuinely confused by his distress. The highest honor my civilization can offer. Specialists with crucial skills have moral obligation to serve the collective's survival. Individual preference is secondary to billions of lives depending on your expertise. In human ethics, individual autonomy is not secondary to collective needs, David countered. We believe people have right to choose their commitments, even when those choices aren't optimal for others. Your species' ethics are noted, Urathara said, but under Kirathi law you are bound. I selected you personally. Ancient precedent applies. Your service is permanent unless I choose to release you, and I will not release you because my civilization actually needs your expertise to survive. The camp's Kirathi workers were watching this exchange, with expressions suggesting they found David's objections incomprehensible. Being personally selected by the sovereign was honor their entire culture revered, and his resistance looked like insanity from their perspective. The negotiation that followed took 3 days and involved human legal representatives, Kirathi constitutional experts, and multiple mediators trying to bridge fundamentally incompatible frameworks for service and autonomy. David couldn't terminate the binding under Kirathi law. Urathara refused to release him because her civilization genuinely needed his expertise. But he could negotiate terms under which he served. Regular leave to visit Earth, scheduled at reasonable intervals. Right to refuse assignments violating his ethics, subject to good faith negotiation about alternatives. Compensation reflecting permanent commitment rather than temporary contract. And most importantly, explicit acknowledgement that while Kirathi law bound him to service, human principles demanded his consent be continuously earned rather than assumed permanent. You're asking me to verify your ongoing consent, Urathara said, struggling with concept. Your service is bound by law. Your consent was given when you accepted selection. Why would I need to continuously confirm what's already established? Because human autonomy includes the right to withdraw consent, David explained. I'm bound by your law, but if you want me to provide honest technical assessment rather than resentful compliance, you need to treat my continued service as something earned rather than something owned. Urithara processed this for a long moment before responding. You're arguing that forcing you into resentful service undermines the honest assessment that made you valuable. Exactly, David confirmed. That's actually reasonable, Urithara admitted, though it violates every framework my culture has for how sovereign service works. The compromise they reached established precedent. Permanent binding under Kirathi law combined with ongoing consent verification under human ethics, creating framework where David was technically permanent royal advisor, but practically operating under employment terms respecting his autonomy. 2 years later, David's geological surveys had identified the rare element deposits that stabilized the Ascendancy's resource crisis. His relationship with Urithara had evolved from terrified subordinate to someone who still argued with her decisions, but understood he was arguing with sovereign, who genuinely valued his honest assessment. His final log entry acknowledged the transformation. Was selected by Monarch operating incognito as project supervisor. Discovered that casual workplace treatment accidentally invoked ancient precedent, making me permanent royal advisor rather than temporary contractor. Negotiated terms respecting both Kirathi binding law and human autonomy principles. Currently serving as royal advisor who still argues with the sovereign's decisions, because that's apparently why she selected me. Recommend updating contracts. Some cultures don't have employment relationships, they have permanent service obligations. Humans need to understand the difference before accepting positions that sound like jobs but are actually lifetime commitments. Urithara's log was more direct. Selected human specialist whose casual professionalism demonstrated capacity for honest technical assessment. His resistance to permanent binding revealed fundamental incompatibility between Kirathi service frameworks and human autonomy principles. Negotiated compromise allowing his continued service while respecting his need for ongoing consent verification. His surveys saved billions of lives. His continued willingness to argue with my decisions proves that sometimes the most valuable advisors are the ones who require consent be continuously earned rather than assuming permanent loyalty comes with the position. David remained bound to the ascendancy under Kirathi law, but he remained by choice under human ethics, and sometimes that distinction between being bound and choosing to stay was the difference between resentful compliance and genuine service. The sovereign who'd selected him learned that human autonomy wasn't weakness, but framework ensuring that permanent commitments remained voluntary even when law made them binding. And the human who'd been selected learned that some honors came with obligations that couldn't be refused, only negotiated. One permanent advisory position at a time.